The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across Terminal B. A young black woman in her early 20s walked confidently through the bustling corridor, her backpack filled with medical textbooks hanging from one shoulder. She was a pre-med student at one of the most prestigious universities in Boston, heading back after spending a heartwarming weekend with her grandmother. The weekend had been filled with home-cooked meals, old family stories, and her grandmother's proud tears when she showed her latest test scores. Her grandmother had worked as a nurse for 40 years, and seeing her granddaughter follow in her footsteps in healthcare meant everything to her. They had spent hours looking through old photo albums, sharing laughs over embarrassing childhood pictures, and talking about her dreams of becoming a pediatric surgeon. As she approached Gate 23, she checked her boarding pass one more time. Flight 2317, Seat 14A perfect, she thought, a window seat. She loved watching the clouds during takeoff, something that hadn't changed since her first flight when she was just 8 years old. The gate area was crowded with the usual mix of business travelers typing away on laptops, families trying to keep their children entertained, and solo travelers lost in their phones or books. When the gate agent called for Zone 2 boarding, she joined the line, ticket and ID ready in hand. The flight attendant at the entrance greeted her with a warm smile, "Welcome aboard." She made her way down the narrow aisle, politely navigating past others who were still settling in. Finding row 14, she stored her backpack in the overhead compartment, keeping only her biology notes for the upcoming midterm exam. As she settled into her window seat, she pulled out her phone to send one last text to her grandmother, "Just boarded. Thanks for everything, Nana. Love you." Her grandmother replied almost instantly with a string of heart emojis and "Call me when you land, sweetie." The familiar sounds of boarding surrounded her, the shuffle of feet, the thud of bags being stored overhead, children asking if they're there yet, and the constant hum of conversations. She opened her biology notes, highlighting important passages about cardiovascular systems, completely unaware that in just a few minutes, this routine flight would become anything but ordinary. Through the window, she watched the ground crew loading the last of the luggage into the cargo hold. The morning sun had risen higher now, turning the wing into a silvery mirror. She took a deep breath, feeling grateful for the peaceful weekend and excited to get back to her studies. Her professors had always praised her dedication, and she wasn't about to let them down. A flight attendant walked past, checking that all bags were properly stored. The plane was nearly full now, with just a few passengers still making their way down the aisle. The seat next to her remained empty, though she could hear more footsteps approaching. She returned to her notes, reviewing complex medical terminology, blissfully unaware that the next few moments would change not just her day, but spark a conversation that would reach far beyond Flight 2317. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead as she highlighted another important passage about cardiac rhythms. Everything felt normal, routine, ordinary, the calm before a storm that nobody saw coming. Little did anyone know that this flight would soon become a powerful reminder of both how far society had come and how far it still needed to go. The peaceful atmosphere of Flight 2317 shattered like glass when heavy footsteps stopped abruptly at row 14. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit, probably in his mid-50s, stood in the aisle, staring at his ticket, then at the young woman in the window seat, then back at his ticket again. His perfectly polished shoes and designer watch suggested someone used to getting his way. The man's face twisted into a frown as he caught the attention of a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made nearby passengers look up from their phones and magazines. "There must be some mistake with my seat assignment." He held out his boarding pass, pointing at it repeatedly with a manicured finger. The flight attendant, a cheerful woman with kind eyes and graying hair at her temples, checked his ticket. "No mistake, sir. 14B is your assigned seat for this flight to Boston." That's when it started. The man's voice rose, sharp and clear above the ambient airplane noise. "I'm not sitting here," he declared, making no attempt to lower his voice. "I paid full price for this ticket. I'm not sitting next to." He gestured dismissively toward the young woman, who had stopped reading her biology notes and was now sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Other passengers began to notice. A businessman 2 rows ahead removed his earbuds. A mother pulled her curious child closer. The young woman kept her eyes fixed on her textbook, but her hands had started trembling slightly. "Sir," the flight attendant began, her professional smile strained but holding, "if you'd like to discuss this, we can step back to the galley." But the man wasn't interested in being discreet. "No, we can discuss it right here." "I want a different seat. I'm not sitting next to her kind. This is ridiculous." "I'm a Platinum member. I fly this route every month, and I've never been so insulted." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the nearby rows. A teenager across the aisle slowly raised their phone, the camera app already open. The young woman in the window seat remained silent, but tears had begun forming in her eyes, though she blinked them back determinedly. The flight attendant's voice took on a firmer tone. "Sir, please lower your voice. We can discuss seating options, but I need you to remain calm and—" "Calm? You want me to be calm?" His voice rose even higher. "This is unacceptable. Get me your supervisor. Better yet, get the captain. I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this circus." More phones were out now, recording the scene. A couple in the row behind began whispering furiously. An elderly man 3 rows up stood partially, turning to glare at the disruptive passenger. The young woman finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I can move if it will help." But before she could finish, several voices from surrounding seats cut in. "Don't you dare move. You stay right where you are, honey. He's the one who should move." The man's face reddened as he realized people were recording him. "You can't film me without my permission." He snapped at the teenager with the phone. "This is harassment." A second flight attendant appeared, this one taller and more senior looking. "Sir, we need to resolve this situation immediately. The flight is full, and we're already behind schedule." The man's response was immediate and loud. "Then she needs to be removed from the flight. I'm not sitting here, and I'm not flying if she's on this plane." The cabin had gone completely silent except for his voice and the soft sound of the air conditioning. Every eye was on row 14. The young woman sat perfectly straight, dignity evident in her posture despite the humiliation being heaped upon her. Her grandmother's words from the weekend echoed in her mind. "Hold your head high, baby. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Little did the angry man know, but his next actions would seal his fate, turning what he thought was his moment of power into something that would change his life forever, and not in the way he expected. The tension in the cabin of Flight 2317 had reached a breaking point. The soft whirring of phones recording the incident created an eerie backdrop to the unfolding scene. A middle-aged woman in a floral dress across the aisle had been filming since the beginning, her hands shaking with anger as she captured every moment of the man's outburst. "Everyone needs to see this," she whispered to her seatmate. "The world needs to know these things still happen." Her video was already streaming live on social media, gathering viewers by the second. Comments and reactions were pouring in, most expressing outrage at the man's behavior. The man in the expensive suit noticed the recording and his face contorted with rage. "You can't film me. This is a violation of my privacy." He tried to shield his face with his briefcase, but it was too late. His words, his actions, his face, everything had been captured in crystal clear detail. More passengers joined in, pulling out their phones. The soft pings of social media notifications began echoing through the cabin as the video started circulating online. The young woman in the window seat remained composed, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She pulled out her phone and, with trembling fingers, typed a message to her grandmother. "Nana, I wish you were here." A young father sitting in the row behind spoke up, his sleeping toddler cradled against his chest. "Hey man, my daughter is trying to sleep. Either sit down or get off the plane. Nobody wants to hear your racist garbage." The man spun around, pointing his finger accusingly. "Don't you dare call me racist. I have every right to choose who I sit next to. I paid good money for this ticket." An elderly gentleman in a veteran's cap stood up slowly, steadying himself on the seat in front. "Son, I didn't fight for this country so people like you could treat others this way. What you're doing isn't just wrong, it's un-American." The flight attendants huddled near the galley, speaking urgently into their phones. One of them approached the young woman gently. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "Would you like some water?" The young woman nodded, grateful for the kindness. Her phone buzzed, Another message from her grandmother: remember who you are. You come from strong people. Don't let anyone dim your light. Meanwhile, social media was exploding. The live stream had already reached thousands of viewers. Comments flooded in. This is happening right now on Flight 2317. Someone identify this man. His company needs to see this. Stand strong, sister. We're with you. A businesswoman in a smart blazer 3 rows up was already on her phone, speaking quietly but intensely. Yes, I'm watching your employee right now on Flight 2317. You might want to check social media. This is going viral. The man's phone started buzzing incessantly. Notifications poured in as people began tagging him in the viral videos. His face paled slightly as he glanced at his screen, but his anger only seemed to grow. This is ridiculous. You're all trying to ruin my life because I want a different seat. A college student wearing headphones spoke up from the back. No, man. You're ruining your own life. We're just showing the world who you really are. The young woman in the window seat took a deep breath and finally looked directly at the man. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying throughout the now silent cabin. Sir, I'm not moving. I paid for this seat, just like you. If you don't want to sit here, that's your choice. But I'm staying right where I am. Applause broke out across the cabin. Several passengers wiped tears from their eyes. The flight attendants exchanged knowing looks. They'd already made their decision about how this would end. The man's face turned an even deeper shade of red. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a new voice cut through the cabin. Calm, authoritative, and coming from the intercom. This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay due to a situation in the cabin. Please remain seated while we handle this matter. Heavy footsteps could be heard coming from the front of the plane. The man's expression changed from anger to uncertainty as he realized this incident was spiraling far beyond his control. His phone continued to buzz with notifications, each one a reminder that his actions were being witnessed not just by the passengers on Flight 2317, but by thousands of people around the world. What happened next would become one of the most viewed viral videos of the year, a moment that would spark nationwide conversations about privilege, accountability, and the power of standing up to discrimination in the digital age. The sound of determined footsteps echoed down the aisle as the chief flight attendant made his way toward row 14. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the kind of calm presence that comes from decades of handling difficult situations at 35,000 feet. Behind him walked 2 airport security officers, their badges glinting under the cabin lights. The angry passenger's demeanor shifted slightly at the sight of the officers, but he quickly puffed himself up again. Finally, someone with authority. This woman needs to be removed from the flight immediately. I've been nothing but reasonable, and everyone's treating me like I'm the problem. The chief flight attendant raised an eyebrow, looking pointedly at the sea of phones still recording every moment. Sir, we've been monitoring this situation from the beginning. Our cabin crew has reported your behavior, and the captain has reviewed the incident. Good, the man interrupted. Then you understand that I'm the victim here. I'm a platinum member. I spend thousands with this airline every month. A gentle chime sounded through the cabin, and the captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the continued delay. We take the safety and dignity of all our passengers very seriously. Please remain seated while we resolve this situation. The young woman in the window seat sat quietly, her biology textbook still open on her lap, though she hadn't looked at it for several minutes. Her phone screen lit up with another message from her grandmother. Baby, whatever's happening, remember you have a whole family behind you. Stay strong. The chief flight attendant cleared his throat. Sir, I need you to lower your voice and listen carefully. We've reviewed the situation, and we have 3 options for you. He held up one finger. First, you can take your assigned seat without further incident. A second finger went up. Second, you can accept a seat in the last row, if that's preferable to you. A third finger joined the others. Or third, you can leave this flight, and we'll help you make arrangements for another one. The man's face reddened even more. Those aren't options. I paid for this specific seat. I demand. Sir, one of the security officers cut in, her voice firm but professional. Those are your only options, and you need to choose quickly. This flight is already delayed, and there are passengers with connections to make. A businessman in first class had walked back to use the bathroom and now stood watching the scene unfold. "Hey, isn't that the VP of sales from Tech Solutions?" he asked loudly, looking at his phone. "Yeah, it is. I'm in their LinkedIn network." "Wow, this is going to be interesting Monday morning at their office." The man's phone buzzed again, and this time when he looked at it, his face went pale. His company was already being tagged in the viral videos. Comments were flooding their social media accounts. The hashtag Flight 2317 was trending. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You're all recording me without permission. I'll sue. I'll contact my lawyers." He jabbed his finger toward the young woman. "This is her fault. She should have just moved when I asked." An elderly woman across the aisle spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. "Young man, I've lived long enough to see things change in this country, and I've lived long enough to see things stay the same. But I never thought I'd see someone so proud of their hatred in 2025. Shame on you." The chief flight attendant raised his hand for silence. "Sir, we need your decision now. What's it going to be?" The man looked around the cabin, suddenly seeming to realize he had no allies here. Every face showed disgust or disappointment. Every phone was still recording. His own phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. The young woman in the window seat met his gaze steadily, her dignity intact despite his attempts to humiliate her. The security officers stepped closer, their presence a clear reminder that this situation would end one way or another. The man's expensive suit suddenly seemed to weigh heavy on his shoulders as the consequences of his actions began to sink in. What happened in the next few minutes would not only define the rest of this flight, but would become a powerful reminder that in today's connected world, accountability can be swift and far-reaching. The video of what came next would be shared millions of times, discussed on morning shows, and used in corporate training sessions across the country. The tension in the cabin of Flight 2317 reached its peak as the man in the expensive suit stood frozen, his face a mix of anger and dawning realization. His phone had stopped buzzing, probably because his notifications had completely overwhelmed the device. The trending hashtag Flight 2317 was now appearing on screens throughout the cabin as passengers checked their social media feeds. "Sir," the chief flight attendant said firmly, "we need your final decision. Now." The man's lips trembled as he tried to form words, his earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of collective disapproval. Just then, his phone rang, a video call from his company's CEO. The blood drained from his face as he stared at the screen. I, he stammered, looking wildly around the cabin. The security officers took a step closer, their presence leaving no doubt about how this would end if he didn't make the right choice. The young woman in the window seat straightened her back and spoke clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed cabin. "Everyone is waiting, sir. Your choice affects all of us." Her quiet dignity seemed to be the final straw. The man's shoulders sagged, and in that moment, everyone watched his privilege and arrogance crumble away, leaving behind a small, frightened man who had just realized he'd destroyed his reputation in less than 15 minutes. I'll get off," he muttered, barely audible. "I'll take another flight." A collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin, followed by scattered applause. The security officers moved efficiently, helping him retrieve his carry-on bag from the overhead compartment. As they escorted him toward the front of the plane, passengers began to cheer and clap louder. "Good riddance." "Bye-bye, big shot." "Hope your company sees this." The young woman finally allowed herself to relax slightly, her hands still trembling as she picked up her phone to text her grandmother. "It's over, Nana. They're removing him from the plane." "I stood my ground, just like you taught me." The response was immediate. "That's my girl. Your grandfather would be so proud of you right now." As the man was led away, the businesswoman who had called his company earlier stood up. "Excuse me," she called out to everyone. "I just want you all to know that I spoke with someone at Tech Solutions. They're already aware of the situation, and they're not happy. Their CEO is apparently livid." The teenager who had started the original recording grinned. "Yeah, the video's everywhere now. My post alone has over 50,000 views, and it's only been 20 minutes. The chief flight attendant returned to row 14, kneeling beside the young woman's seat. "Miss, are you all right? Can we get you anything? Water? Coffee? It's on the house." She smiled shakily. "Just some water, please. And thank you. Thank you for doing the right thing." He patted her hand gently. "No, thank you for showing such grace under pressure. You handled this better than anyone could have expected." A mother with 2 young children leaned forward from the row behind. "Sweetie, my daughters saw everything. You just taught them a powerful lesson about standing up for yourself with dignity. Would you mind if they took a picture with you? They want to remember this moment." The young woman wiped away a tear and nodded, turning to smile at the little girls who were looking at her with admiration. Their mother snapped the photo, adding it to her social media story with the caption, "Teaching my girls what real strength looks like. Hashtag Flight 2317 hashtag Stand Up Taurusism." The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, the situation has been resolved. We'll be pushing back from the gate in approximately 5 minutes. I want to personally apologize for the delay and thank you all for your patience. And to our passenger in 14A, on behalf of the entire crew, we're honored to have you on board." Fresh applause broke out. The flight attendants began their final preparations for takeoff, but passengers kept coming up to offer words of support, handshakes, and even hugs. Someone had started a supportive hashtag #WestEndWith14A, and it was already gaining traction. As the plane finally began to taxi, the young woman looked out her window at the morning sun, now higher in the sky. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Hold your head high, baby. Don't let anyone make you feel small." She hadn't let anyone make her feel small today. Instead, she had shown everyone on Flight 2317. And now the world, what quiet strength looked like. But this wasn't the end of the story. Even as the plane lifted off into the clear blue sky, the video of what had happened was spreading across the internet like wildfire. The consequences for the man in the expensive suit were just beginning, and the impact of this incident would reach far beyond one flight on one morning in 2025. By the time Flight 2317 touched down in Boston, the incident had exploded across social media. The original videos had been viewed millions of times, shared by celebrities, politicians, and civil rights activists. News fans were already waiting at the airport, their satellite dishes gleaming in the afternoon sun. The young pre-med student had spent the flight quietly studying her biology notes, occasionally glancing at her phone to see the story spreading. Her grandmother had been busy too, sharing the video with their entire family and her church group. "My grandbaby stood up to hate today," she'd written. "She made our ancestors proud." As the plane taxied to the gate, the captain made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all again for your support during today's incident. To our passenger in 14A, the crew, and I would be honored if you'd be the first to deplane. We've arranged for airport staff to help you avoid the media if you prefer." She thought about it for a moment, then stood up. "Thank you, but I think I should speak to them. Someone needs to show people that these things still happen, even in 2025. Maybe sharing my story will help change things." The passengers applauded again as she gathered her belongings. The flight attendants formed a protective circle around her as she walked through the terminal, where reporters were already setting up their cameras and microphones. Meanwhile, across town at the headquarters of Tech Solutions, an emergency board meeting was in progress. The videos of their vice president's behavior had gone viral, and the company's social media teams were overwhelmed with angry messages from customers and activists. "We've lost 3 major contracts in the last hour," the CEO announced grimly. "Our stocks are dropping. We need to take immediate action." Within minutes, they released a statement. "Tech Solutions has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. Effective immediately, the employee involved in the Flight 2317 incident has been terminated. We are reaching out to the affected passenger to make this right." Back at the airport, the young woman stood before the news cameras, her voice steady as she shared her story. "I want everyone to understand something," she said. "This isn't about one angry man on one flight. This is about standing up for what's right, about showing the world that we won't be intimidated into giving up our dignity." Social media continued to explode. The hashtag #WestEndWith14A had evolved into a broader movement, with people sharing their own stories of standing up to discrimination. The little girls who had taken a photo with her on the plane had posted it, and it had become a symbol of hope and courage. The man who had caused the incident was facing his own social media storm. His name and face were everywhere. His country club membership was revoked. Friends and colleagues were distancing themselves. His LinkedIn profile was flooded with negative comments. In just a few hours, his entire carefully constructed world had crumbled. That evening, as the young woman finally arrived at her dorm room, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Talk shows wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations wanted her to speak at their events. A famous documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story. She sat on her bed, overwhelmed by it all, when a special news alert caught her eye. The airline had just announced new anti-discrimination training for all employees, using the Flight 2317 incident as a teaching moment. They were also creating a scholarship fund for minority students in medical school, naming it after her. Her roommate rushed in, laptop in hand. "You're trending everywhere. People are calling you the Queen of Quiet Strength. Even the First Lady tweeted about you." She opened her biology textbook, trying to focus on her upcoming exam, but another message from her grandmother made her pause. "Your grandfather used to say that one person standing up for what's right could change the world. Today, you proved him right." The story continued to spread throughout the evening. News anchors debated the incident. Social commentators analyzed its significance. Companies reviewed their diversity policies. Parents showed the video to their children as a lesson in courage and dignity. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Other airlines began announcing their own anti-discrimination initiatives. Companies started requiring their executives to undergo sensitivity training. What had started as one incident on one flight was becoming a catalyst for real change. As night fell over Boston, the young woman finally allowed herself to really feel everything that had happened. She was exhausted but proud, scared but determined. Her phone buzzed one last time. Another message from her grandmother: "Get some rest, baby. Tomorrow's going to be an even bigger day." 1 week after the Flight 2317 incident, the Morning Sun streamed through the windows of a major TV network studio. The young pre-med student sat in the makeup chair, preparing for her appearance on the nation's most watched morning show. Her grandmother sat nearby, beaming with pride. "Are you nervous, baby?" her grandmother asked, adjusting her Sunday best dress. "A little," she admitted, "but you taught me to speak my truth." The makeup artist finished her work, and a producer appeared with a 5-minute warning. The past week had been a whirlwind. The video had reached over 50 million views. She'd received thousands of supportive messages from around the world. Children wrote essays about her for their school assignments. Companies used her story in their training programs, but most importantly, real change was happening. The morning show host, a respected journalist known for her tough questions, welcomed her warmly. "Your story has touched millions of people," she began. "How does it feel to have become a symbol of standing up to discrimination?" The young woman smiled, remembering her grandmother's words about holding her head high. "I never meant to become a symbol," she answered honestly. "I was just trying to get to my biology exam." The audience chuckled. "But if my experience helps others find their courage, then something good came from that difficult moment." Meanwhile, across the country, the man from the plane was sitting in his empty home office, watching the interview. His world had changed dramatically too. After losing his job, he'd had a lot of time to think. His own children weren't speaking to him. His neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. He'd become a cautionary tale about the consequences of racism in modern America. Back in the studio, the host asked about the changes sparked by the incident. The young woman sat up straighter. The airline's new scholarship program will help 20 minority students attend medical school each year. They're also changing their training policies. But the biggest change I've seen is in people's willingness to speak up when they witness discrimination. The camera panned to show a group of special guests in the audience, passengers from Flight 2317. The teenager who first recorded the incident, the mother with 2 young daughters, the elderly veteran, the businesswoman who called the company. They all stood, receiving warm applause. "And what about the man?" the host asked carefully. "Have you heard from him?" The young woman nodded slowly. He sent me a letter yesterday. I'd like to read part of it if that's okay. She pulled out a piece of paper. I've spent my life thinking my success made me better than others. Watching myself on that video, seeing my behavior through the world's eyes, I felt ashamed for the first time. I'm starting counseling. I'm learning about my prejudices. I'm trying to change. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that you taught me a hard but necessary lesson about humanity. The studio fell silent. The host wiped away a tear. That's quite powerful. How did you respond? I wrote back, she said simply. I told him that change starts with acknowledging our mistakes. I told him about my dreams of becoming a doctor, about my grandmother who worked as a nurse for 40 years, about my grandfather who couldn't eat in certain restaurants but still believed in humanity's goodness. Sometimes people need to see us as human beings, not just faces in a crowd. The interview continued, touching on her upcoming speech at the United Nations, the children's book being written about Flight 2317, and her plans to create a foundation supporting education and anti-discrimination efforts. But she kept coming back to one message. Change happens one person at a time, one moment at a time, one choice at a time. After the show, her grandmother hugged her tight. Your grandfather would be so proud, she whispered. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you helped make the world a little better. That evening, as they walked through Times Square, they saw themselves on the giant screens. The interview was being replayed on multiple channels. People stopped to take photos with them. A group of young girls asked for autographs, calling her their hero. Her phone buzzed with a message from the airline. The first group of scholarship recipients had been selected. 20 dreams of becoming doctors were about to come true because she'd refused to give up her seat on Flight 2317. Later that night, in their hotel room, her grandmother asked, "Do you ever regret not taking another seat that day?" The young woman looked out at the city lights, thinking about everything that had happened. No, she said finally. Someone had to say enough. Someone had to show that change is possible. I'm just grateful it led to something positive. As she got ready for bed, her phone lit up one last time. Another message had gone viral. Thank you, Flight 2317 girl. Today, I stood up to discrimination at my school. You taught me that one person can make a difference. She smiled, knowing that the story of Flight 2317 would continue to inspire others long after the media attention faded. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage, like refusing to give up your seat on a plane.